Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And my name is Sheldon Xie, the Research Fellow at the Center for Globalization Hong Kong, CGHK. Welcome to the CGHK's last session of the US-China Strategic Dialogue Series. The CGHK is the unparalleled and independent Hong Kong-based think tank dedicated to policy research and strategic consultation for private enterprise and governmental agency. So if you guys have followed the previous US-China strategic dialogue sessions in the past few days, we spent time on discussing the details of the Biden-Xi summit during the APEC in San Francisco and exploring the potential scenarios for the cross-strait relations, particularly right after the 2024 Taiwan election result is coming out. So we found that Taiwan has remained the focal point in the Asia-Pacific security landscape. However, in the past weekend, we witnessed a significant challenge faced by the Blue-White coalition in Taiwan, the inability to reach the consensus on the presidential candidates between the Kuomintang, the KMT, and the Taiwan's People Party. TPP has cast uncertainty not just over the cross-strait relations, but also over the security dynamics across the entire Asia-Pacific region. Therefore, we stand as a critical crossroad where the outcomes of these events will definitely shape the future of the landscape of US-China relations and China's periphery, marking the next phase of the US-China-Taiwan strategic triangle. So in this session, we will zoom out a little bit. We will still focusing on the Taiwan issue, but we all also shifted to the implications of the US-China rivalry in the Asia-Pacific. The paramount questions is looming over to us, like how does the intensifying US-China competition challenge the US lead international order in Asia? And what implications or influence arise for the middle countries, so-called quote unquote, caught between the US and China in the next stage, like near the Asia-Pacific region? So in response to the pivotal moment, the CGHK has initiated this last session to comprehend the nuance and the evolving dynamics, leveraging our Hong Kong base and tapping the expertise of distinguished scholars and practitioners in Asia security and diplomacy. Our goal is to bridge the gap of the policy understanding between the US and China. Hence, I'm honored to introduce our esteemed panelists joining us today. First, we have Dr. Douglas Paul, a distinguished fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He is also the former senior director of our Asia Pacific Affairs of the U.S. National Security Council, and was also a former director of the American Institute in Taiwan, AIT, from 2002 to 2006. And from the Chinese side, we have Dr. Teng Jianqun, current director of the Center for Diplomatic Studies at Hunan Normal University. In the past, Dr. Teng also served as a director of the Department of American Studies and the Center for Arms Control in International Security at China's Institute of the International Studies, CIIS. And he has an abundant professional experience in the People's Liberation Army, Navy, when he's serving as the senior colonel. So their wealth expertise in either the practical or the professional, like spanning diplomacy and military affairs, adds significant depth to our discussion today. Last but not least, we have Dr. Peter Chiu, the chairman of the CGHK, and he is also adjunct professor at Hong Kong Baptist University, who will moderate today's sessions. Together, we aim to unravel the complexity, seek insights, and foster a robust discussion that shed the lights on the way forward in the peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific. Now I will turn the floor to our moderator, Dr. Chiu. And following his opening remarks, Dr. Chiu will guide our discussions, and each panelist will begin with a brief 5-minute remarks on the previous Biden-Xi summit or his on evaluation on the Taiwan issue. And after that, there will be an engaging discussion among our panelists. So we will conclude with the Q&A sessions and with our audience before we wrapping up. So I will stop here, and Dr. Chiu, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Sheldon. Thank you, Mr. Howard, and thank you, Jianjun. US-China Summit was finished 6 days ago, so there have been so many readings, interpretations. So I don't want to go to the details, but maybe you guys, you have your own reading. Maybe later on I can ask you to make about 4 or 5 minutes, presentation to express your takes. From my point of view, there are some tactical improvements, but there are also a lot of still remaining strategic disagreement. On one point, in terms of whether the United States and China having a competition, both sides disagrees, right? And also, there's at the end of the day, after the summit, we didn't see any mechanism which gave us some hopes, saying, okay, we can make sure that those kinds of consensus reached during the summit won't be destroyed by any coincidental incident like balloon crisis at the beginning of this year. If we still clearly remember how good was the summit, how well the summit went on the Bali Island last year, exactly also November. But at the beginning of this year, just due to some very small incident, which was the balloon crisis, then everything was destroyed. So it took us almost 1 year to go back to the point, go back to the original point. So we didn't see any mechanism to make sure that something like this wouldn't happen again. But there were indeed some, as I mentioned before, tactical improvement, which is to some extent, one of these was Taiwan. Let me put it this way. There are some stories telling us that President Xi was telling President Biden during the summit that China never had any plan to attack Taiwan, and no one around him was mentioning any planning of attacking Taiwan also. But yesterday, South China Morning Post published an exclusive interview with the former ambassador of China to the United States, Mr. Cui Tiankai. The interview was made before the summit. Cui Tiankai told SCMP that Taiwan question was his wording, life and death questions. So maybe I can stop here. I can ask you guys to make your own points. So how do you see overall the US-China summit? Was it a success or not? If yes, a limited success, in which regard, to what extent? If no, in which regard, to what extent? And how do you see this Taiwan consensus or not consensus? Were President Xi and Mr. Ambassador Cui Tiankai speaking the same language in terms of Taiwan, or they were speaking different terms from different angle? So now I will stop here. I will ask Mr. Douglas Powell to make your points.
Excuse me. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and to your audience and join the colleagues here. There are lots of things that can be said about the summit and where we are today with respect to our mutual or different interests in the issues related to Taiwan. I think first I want to fall back in time a little bit and say, previous year we had the 20th Party Congress, which sort of wrapped up affairs in the mainland. And we're about to enter the American political year for an election for the president and Congress in 2024. And at the same time, Taiwan is in the midst of its own internal election aiming for January, this coming January. And so this is a time when all three sides, especially the US and China, have an interest in buying some calm moments and restricting or deflating the pressure for confrontation to try to get through difficult times, choppy waters, if you will, that are coming our way. Now, this is against a background where China has been trying to reshape the way the world operates. Its close affiliation with Russia during the Ukraine war, the position China has taken leaning toward the Iranians and the Palestinians and the Arab Palestinian and Israeli dispute, and Chinese efforts throughout the Western Pacific to adjust the balance of power in its own favor stand against American efforts to try to preserve the situation that prevailed after World War II and even after the Cold War ended, where the US had a very dominant role in the region. So both sides have big ambitions which compete and rub against each other, and they would very much be liable to provocation during election years, as we're going to go through over the coming 12 months. And so I think it was useful for the leaders to get together and try to calm things down. They made some practical and temporary agreements, which I think are useful. Chinese government has already taken action on precursors for fentanyl. There's promise of military-to-military dialogue. There's promise of increased flights and human exchanges between the two sides, and those are positive, if only limited, developments. But because the sides are also so ambitious, we can't be too optimistic that this will be long-lasting or deep-running kind of cessation of tensions between the two sides. Another problem is that the U.S. and China very diametrically opposed objectives are taking place in an historically unparalleled circumstance, which is both sides have tremendous interrelationships with each other. Trade is very deep, investment is very deep. It's not easy, as in the Cold War or 20th century and 19th century conflicts, to pull the two sides apart and stand in confrontation. Any confrontation gives an advantage to the other side to pull on the strings of interdependency. And it makes it a far more complicated period that we're entering, one that has both high danger and vulnerabilities on both sides. Finally, I just say that I think a common feature for both countries is they tend to overestimate their own strength and underestimate their opponents or their rival strength. And so we have the US believing that it's pulled together coalitions to limit Chinese ambitions in the Pacific, strengthen the NATO, is doing an effective job mostly around the world to repair the damage done to alliances by the Trump administration, and therefore feel stronger. But the US has problems at home that the whole world can see. China, for its part, has been showing strong economic growth and powerful leadership, and the Belt and Road Initiative and other initiatives from the Chinese government have been very persuasive in large parts of the world. But China has fundamental weaknesses as well and some economic difficulties to overcome. So we're entering into a very complicated and risky period. So in short, the summit was a good step to help us get past this transition period, but it doesn't really get to the root of the problems that will be pushing the US and China against each other for the decades ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pao. Maybe Jianqun, now it's your turn to make your point.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the summit between the two presidents actually gave us a little bit of positive development for the peace and stability for relationship between the two countries. If we have a comparison between the two summits in Bali and this time for Raleigh, you can see the relaxed environment and the relaxed atmosphere for the two leaders to have in-depth discussion. I think this is actually a good and a very positive development for the relations between the two countries. There are two reasons to explain such a change, such a shift. Number one is the rebalancing of power between the two countries. If you look at the recent 5 or 6 years, development for relationship between the two countries, you can see the United States actually has initiated so-called strategic competition with China, and at the very beginning, the Chinese government had taken a very active or very aggressive policy towards such so-called strategic competition, and especially in trade. We still remember the trade war in 2018. And then I think from the recent 2 years, I think the Chinese government has changed its policy toward the United States to some extent. For example, the 20th Party's Congress, after the Party's Congress last year, I think the Chinese government or the CPC would like to maintain its own way to go its development, especially for the national modernization. I think this is actually a big change for the two countries to have such a summit. I mean, the rebalancing of power between the two countries actually has entered into a new stage. The second reason why the United States has been so active in engagement in recent, at least 6 months, especially after the Secretary of State Blinken's visit to Beijing, because the coming presidential election in the United States. President Biden would like to get something from the stable relations between China and the United States. We can see the good figures or good development of U.S. economy. So in diplomacy, I think President Biden would like to have something from the development of relations between China and the United States. So there are two reasons. In terms of the future, I think this is actually a very important summit for the two countries. We can see the agriculture, cooperation between the two countries, and of course the cooperation in high tech also on its way. For example, the Boeing would like to increase its production even in China. So this is actually a new signal for the two countries to have stable and healthy relations. So I think this is a very important summit for the two countries, especially the heads of state diplomacy should be of great significance for the peace and stability of the future. And in terms of Taiwan, I think this time the Taiwan question, of course, as you mentioned just now, is very sensitive and very crucial. And I'm sure the Chinese government would like to have, two ways, diplomacy or policy toward the United States. On one side, the Chinese government or the PRA would like to be well prepared to, meet any challenges from Taiwan Island, especially the coming, local leaders election campaign. So I think this is one side of our policy toward the Taiwan question, and another side is that the Chinese officials would like to give a clear-cut, explanation to show the Chinese position in this regard. So I think the Chinese government or the PRA are preparing in two ways. One, engagement with the United States. Another is the preparation for any challenges in the core Taiwan Strait. So I think, to my understanding, in the coming years, I'm sure the relations between the two countries might be on a little bit stable, condition because of the U.S. policy. But we are still facing two big challenges. Number one is the congressmen, and they would like to manipulate the Taiwan issue as a bargaining stake, or for the United States, or even for the individual, benefit. This is one question from the U.S. Capitol. Another is the U.S. military. The United States actually, especially after the so-called strategic competition, I think the U.S. military has been very active. It's just the opposite to the very beginning of the normalization of relations between the two countries. To my memory, I think the U.S. military should be the pioneer for the Sino-U.S. For the development of China-U.S. relations. The first delegation was led by the then Secretary of Defense, Mr. Brown. I think he paid a visit in January 1980 that was the first delegation from the United States to China, and they visited several sensitive military bases in Beijing for about 10 or more days in China. And then I think another military delegation from China led by Liu Huaqing and then Ji Pengfei paid visit in May or in July that year. So I think the military of the United States has been very active in the so-called competition with China. That's another challenge. So there are at least two challenges we are facing now for a stable relationship between the two countries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jianxun. Yeah, it looks like you both are quite optimistic, just like when we talked about U.S.-China relations in February 2021. During that time, that was, as I said before, exactly almost 2 weeks after Biden took over his office, and we were very optimistic. And you guys, you were talking with Alexander Huang Jiezhen, yeah, and he actually he came to our webinar last night. Due to some time difference, he couldn't come today. How optimistic we were in February 2021, 2 weeks after Biden took over his office. And Alexander Huang Jiezhen even proposed that, do you still remember what he proposed during our webinar? He said the year 2021 should be a year of dialogue between Taiwan and mainland China. And he argued in the way that China will be celebrating 100 years birthday of Communist Party of China in July 2021. And it will be still 6 years until 2027, when when PLA will be celebrating its 100 years birthday. So this will be, to some extent, a short period of time of 6 years when mainland China can have a peaceful dialogue with Taiwan in order to try to avoid eventual conflict, military conflict in 2027. But as I told him last night, it has been proven to be too optimistic. Look at how many things happened in radical way in the last 2.5 or almost 3 years. So my question is, guys, are we still too optimistic or not? How can we define the just finished the U.S.-China summit in San Francisco? I agree, this was a good stop. But was this a good stop on the way of getting better or on the way of getting worse? If we remember as I mentioned before, how many bad things happened in the last 2.5 years particularly after July 2021. Let me mention some keywords: decoupling, and then de-risking, and then small yard high fence. And then when we talked in February 2021, no one was talking about military conflict between mainland China and Taiwan. That's why Alexander Wang, he was so optimistic by proposing a peaceful dialogue between mainland China and Taiwan, starting from the year 2021. And then the fact was, starting from 2021, everybody was talking about military unification, using military force. In the last few months, things have been coming down a little bit. So my general question, maybe I'm too naive. I used to be a journalist, so my habit is always try to exaggerate things. Stability of wisdom and thoughts. Mr. Powell, are we still optimistic? Are we on the way? So was the just finished the U.S.-China summit in Francisco a good stop on the way of getting better or on the way of getting worse?
Well, first, back when Biden first came into office, to the extent I was optimistic, it was because the United States had been letting down its guard, had not been holding the region together under the Trump administration, and needed to be returning to more traditional relationships with our friends and allies in the Asia-Pacific region. And Biden has actually done that in his time in office at an international policy level. To your current question, I consider the recent summit to be a temporary interval in a period of tension. So returning to tension you can be optimistic or pessimistic. I think we will get back there. Now, one of the prospects that came out of San Francisco, it's very unformed. It's just an idea, which is to have more deeply running bureaucratic interaction, military to military, State Department to foreign ministry, economic ministry to economic ministry kinds of dialogues and working groups to solve problems. If that can follow this summit, I think it will take us away from having to depend on just meetings between the very top leaders once a year. There won't be a meeting between the top leaders next year because of American elections. So we can't rely on that. We need more deep running mechanisms for clear communication and to signal to each other what the important red lines are that should not be crossed. My view, as I tried to say at the outset, is that the long-term outlook is not good for avoiding tension. The long-term tension is built in, and we have confrontations to come, but there are still ways of dealing with each other because of our interdependency that may prevent us from going so far as to get into unnecessary conflict. That will be the challenge as we come out of the coming year and go into the following year.
The long-run outlook of avoiding tension or conflict was not good. Will be not good, you said, right? I agree.
As of now, it's not good.
Yeah. That's the actual conclusion which we really need to, So what's your take, Jingqun?
Yeah, I think Biden administration, why we should be optimistic about the future of the relations between the two countries. I think just because of two reasons. Number one is the rebalancing of power between the two countries. I'm sure the Chinese are quite familiar with the situation we are facing now. We can see our top leaders have never accepted the phrase strategic competition. This is actually a geopolitical phrase. That to some extent, to some understanding, this might be a zero-sum game, theory for the two major powers. So I think if you look at the recent 5 or 6 years, you cannot see the use of such a phrase by the top leaders, even like Wang Yi or some other officials. So this is actually a very clear-cut signal that China would like to go its own way, but China would like to engage with the United States. That's another side of the coin. So I think the peace and stability, or the healthy development of relations between the two countries today haven't relied on the power. How can I say, the development of the comprehensive power development of China. I'm sure the recent development just to show the strong signal that the United States would like to engage with China just because of some development, for example, in high tech, mid-60s, the Huawei. This is actually a good example. And Boeing would like to open new factories in China. So I think if only China has such a power, comprehensive power, I'm sure the United States would like to engage or to cooperate with China. This is actually a condition for the healthy and good relations between the two countries. Another, I think, is the Biden administration's staff. If you look at the staff, some advisors, they are quite familiar with the situation in China. Some of them studied in China and get some position in China. So I think they are quite familiar with China, but they are young, they are ambitious. The big challenge is they are lacking of historic understanding of the complication of the relation between the two countries. So this is actually a big challenge. Some young advisors can give Biden some good ideas, but sometimes, to my understanding, to my observation, he cannot give good advice, opinion, or suggestions to the president. This is another big challenge. So, to my understanding, Biden can control the situation. Even the administration can, deny the application of super visa from the congressman to pay visit to Taiwan. The Biden administration can do that, but in recent at least 3 years, President Biden denied to do so. But in the coming year, to my understanding, I'm sure Biden administration can do something, and he can deny some application for the visit to Taiwan. So I think the coming year, at least, I'm quite optimistic about the relations between the two countries, at least in 1 year, in the coming 1 year.
In the coming 1 year to ahead, in the coming 1 year to come, yeah, you're optimistic.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Paul, I totally share your feeling. I can only say it's a feeling. I don't have a theoretical foundation. Share your feeling, saying long-term outlook of avoiding conflict between China and the United States is not good. But since it's a feeling, so give me some indications in which areas and why, to what extent do you say the outlook is not good?
On the one hand, we have China, which is undertaking a kind of revolutionary approach to international relations, which is to quietly, at the lowest possible cost, reduce American influence, reduce the structures left behind from World War II in the Western world and in the Asia-Pacific region. China has revolutionary ambitions, but is not willing to pay revolutionary costs through direct conflict. It wants to extend its influence economically, politically, and through the power of Chinese market force. The United States wants to hang on to its long-held relationships in the Western Pacific and in Europe. Recently, it has strengthened those relationships in NATO and in the Western Pacific, but we have some underlying challenges at home in our domestic politics and in our international obligations. The US military is diverted to supporting Ukraine and supporting Israel in the Gaza struggle. And so it cannot focus itself entirely on the Asia Pacific. The gap between the US and China and the Asia Pacific may create problems that can lead to a sense of opportunity on one side or the other to take advantage of American weakness or to respond to Chinese strength in confronting in the Western Pacific area. Now, to go to Taiwan on this question, a year ago, or a little more than a year ago, we had a visit by the Democratic Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, to Taiwan. And as Jen Chun pointed out, the Biden administration was not willing to stop that. However, this past spring, Tsai Ing-wen transited the United States, and she met with the Republican Speaker of the House, McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
The outlook, the event was much less controversial. And I would say that over the last 6 months, the US government has returned to more traditional discipline in how it handles questions related to Taiwan. And I think that is an important signal which was responded to by the Chinese side in meetings with Blinken in Beijing, with Wang Yi and Jake Sullivan in Vienna and in Malta. And I think we've seen a calming in that area, which is very helpful as we try to get through the sensitive developments that will accompany elections in the US and Taiwan in the coming year. I hope that that will be a lasting effect, but we don't know. We have to see how the elections go.
Okay, later on we can go back to the election results or the eventual election results or the scenarios in Taiwan. So let's focus first on eventual, which I really don't hope to happen, eventual military conflict between China and the United States. Overall, we don't see any clues because both sides are nuclear powers, but we do have some hotspot, which is Taiwan. So do you think, Mr. Powell and Chen Chun, do you think Taiwan if things are going to be radical or radicalized, could be a hotspot for eventual military conflict between the United States and China. Otherwise, I really see, maybe I'm too naive, I really don't see any clues for eventual military conflict between our two nuclear powers, even not on the South China Sea, even not on the Korean Peninsula. But Taiwan is indeed eventually a possible hotspot. Do you agree or do you disagree?
If you're speaking to me, I think all of the candidates in Taiwan's election are playing down the prospect of confrontation. It's not the same as it has been in other elections. So I'm not really worried that Taiwan's domestic politics will produce results to which China must respond in its thinking militarily. But I do worry about our inability to manage close contact between the United States and Chinese armed forces in the Taiwan area. There, the summit last week indicated there would be a resumption of military dialogue. But there were no military leaders from either side at that meeting. And we have to see what the concrete outcome of those instructions from the leaders to their military to begin communication will produce. In the past, the Chinese side has been more reluctant to engage in these dialogues than the US. And at times the US has also been reluctant. And now we have to test whether we can find means to reduce the chances that an accidental military friction will lead to a broader conflict around the Taiwan area.
Okay, Jianjun. So Mr. Powell basically said candidates, no matter in which party, basically won't provocate, right, to actually conflict. But PAA's engagement in the area surrounding Taiwan is a problem. So do you agree?
Yeah, you're right. I think the presence of the engagement of PRA in recent years just has become a very important part for the central government policy to maintain pressure on Taiwan, especially on Madam Tsai and the coming leader, no matter from Lai Ching-te or from Hou You-yi. I don't think they can change such tendency or the posture of the military presence in this region. This is actually a long-term policy or strategy for the PRA and for the central government of China. So this will be will not be changed in the coming years. And second, I think it depends on China. It depends on the United States. Also, it depends on the local leaders from Taiwan Island, whether we can maintain such peace and stability across Taiwan Strait. But to my observation in recent years, I think Madam Tsai would like to take opportunity of so-called strategic competition between China and the United States, and she would like to stand with the United States and to give military support and give some other support for the military presence of the U.S. And also, I think she might take the last opportunity for her or for the party to go, in an independent way. So I think the peace and stability heavily depends on the exchanges or engagement between China and the United States, not only on Taiwan, especially on Madam Tsai.
Okay, let's try to speculate a little bit. Let's say, I can only say it's a speculation. Speculate a little bit about what's going on with the election outcome results scenarios after after 13th of January next year. So now coalition between KMT and the People's Party on one hand, and also there could be some other scenarios. So basically, everything will turn out to be the results latest by 24th of this month. So what's your feeling now? In terms of speculation, we can only say, what's your feeling? Who will win? And what will be the policy line after the election? I mean, it's a total speculation, but based on our feeling, based on the experience, based on our logic, logics. Mr. Powell.
Well, I think the blue and the white factions had a chance to pull themselves together over the weekend and constitute a counterweight to the polling advantage that the Minjindang DPP enjoys, but they failed in the meetings to reach an agreement. They're down to the last few days when they have to find a way to combine their capacities to unite in a common front against the DPP. And we've seen that this happened in the 2000 election, which led to the split within the blue camp at that time, or the blue and the orange camps, if you will. And that led to the election of Chen Shui-bian with a very narrow, I think it was 37% of the vote. Lai Ching-te seems to have about that, or roughly that percentage of the vote. And if the blue and the white forces can't combine, he has a chance of winning in the coming election, even if he doesn't greatly expand his political mandate in the polls before then. So it's been a moment where it's been very unstable in Taiwan politics because the opposition camp is so fractured that it can't so far reach a common ticket to run against the ruling party's ticket.
Okay, Jianqun, what's your feeling?
To my observation, I think the gentleman, I mean, Mr. Lai Ching-te might take the opportunity to continue the policy of Madam Tsai because of the party's policy, because of the support from the United States. I'm sure the U.S. would like to have a moderate local leader, not so aggressive to mainland, to the regional peace and stability. So I think, to my observation, I think DPP might get the election, maybe in January next year. So I think because of a lot of support from the United States, and I'm sure the U.S. leaders, especially Eisenberger, paid several visits to Taiwan after she took the office as the chairman. So this time the influence from the U.S. might be a key, very key, key factor to the coming election in Taiwan.
So the United States will play a sort of key role in.
Yeah, to some extent, to my observation, because Madam Tsai would like to take side with the United States. She would like to manipulate the contradictions between the two major powers, between China and the United States.
Okay, Mr. Powell, sorry for this naive questions, as a naive journalist or former journalist. Which side does the United States, or does, to be precise, does Biden administration prefer? I know it's a very difficult question to answer.
Well, the United States will always say that it prefers the outcome that the majority of the people on Taiwan prefer. I think the U.S. does not have major troubles with Tsai Ing-wen or Lai Ching-te's basic policy. She's been pursuing more stability than instability. She's been very cautious in her diplomacy, and Lai Ching-te is sending messages that he wants to continue that. The blue and the white camps have also had their own views, which are, I think, not inherently in contradiction with American interests. So the U.S. can honestly stand back and say it will support whomever the Taiwan people elect.
But so let's say DPP, Lai Ching-te, William Lai, and Xiao Meiqin, both candidates, group union will be in power, will be in the office. So to what extent will be the policy line of Lai Ching-te be different to Tsai Ing-wen? I mean, when Tsai Ing-wen took over office in May 2016, it took Beijing almost 2 years, right, Jian to wait for the One China consensus.
Yeah, I think this is
at the end of the day, Beijing got disappointed. Then
this is a big question whether this is a policy only from Mr. Lai or this is a policy from DPP. We should give clear-cut division between the two policies. Number one is individual policy, as Lai Ching-te repeatedly said. He would like to maintain the so-called independent policy. But I think the DPP might be a little bit moderate, and I'm sure the United States would not like to have a troublemaker like Chen Shui-bian, some years ago.
Yeah.
They cannot. I mean, the United States cannot control Chen Shui-bian at that time. So some Americans said Chen Shui-bian was a troublemaker in this question. So I think we should give some division to the policies by Lai Ching-te or by the DPP party. So this is actually a very complicated issue. I'm sure Lai Ching-te should give a clear-cut explanation to the people in Taiwan and to the United States, and also Madam Tsai would establish some obstacles to barriers to Mr. Lai to go in a little bit moderate way for the party.
You mean Lai Ching-te will be more moderate compared?
Yeah. From the point of the DPP party, I'm sure it cannot go in very aggressive way or exaggerated way. So this is really a different policy from individual choice. I mean, from Lai Ching-te's choice, his intention, his mentality.
Okay, do you agree, Mr. Pao, that Lai Ching-te will be a little bit more moderate? If this scenario will happen, as Jian described before, then we have to consider another factor, which is the vice president candidate, Xiao Meiqing, who is quite internationally connected, who is more experienced in liaising with the United States, so which will give Lai Ching-te's moderate policy even more value-adding points. But Tsai Ing-wen is sanctioned. No, not Tsai Ing-wen. Xiao Meiqing is still sanctioned on the sanctioned list of Beijing, which will make her relationship, which will be value-adding for Lai Ching-te. But since she is sanctioned by Beijing, we might give her these value-adding points even more difficult. Things are getting so complex. What's your?
Well, I think the important point to make is that Lai Ching-te has endorsed the basic policy stance of Tsai Ing-wen, which is not to yield to pressure from China, but not either. If he continues that, as she has said she plans to do until she's out of office, I don't think the question of risk or disruption or provocation really arises. On the question of the role of a vice president, traditionally vice presidents don't matter very much in elections. People vote for the top of the ticket, not for the number 2. And I think Lai Ching-te gets a very strong supporter in having Xiao Meiqing as his running mate, and she knows the U.S. very well, and she can communicate with the U.S. extremely well. But whether that makes a difference to the Taiwan voters who are choosing between one president candidate and another, I think we should not overly estimate the role of the vice presidential candidate.
So I have a question. I have a few questions coming from the audience. One is how is DPP capable to handle communication or engagement with mainland China if this party wins the election? Communication channel. So So, Mr. Pao, do you have some?
Well, I'll give you my initial response, which is China cut off communication channels with the DPP when Tsai Ing-wen was elected, and said that she had not accepted the 92 consensus. And I think that was an unrealistic stance. I wish China would moderate that stance and be willing to open channels, informal or formal, whatever can be devised, with the incoming administration that follows Tsai Ing-wen, because I think it has been counterproductive to everybody's interests to have cut those channels off for the last now 7 years.
Yeah, I think this is actually a choice for the two sides. I mean, cross Taiwan Strait, that might be best choice if we the two sides continue the exchanges of ideas at various level in various areas. That might be good for the peace and stability across Taiwan or in this region. But the big issue is any other countries like Japan, like the United States would like to go in that way, or just would like to manipulate the tension for the so-called strategic competition in Asia Pacific region. That another side of the coin, and we should, not so optimistic in this regard. We should take a full consideration of the, the factors in the development of the situation in this region.
Yeah, and it's also especially, Mr. Pao, things have, as I mentioned many times before, things have radically changed. Not compare with 20 years ago, even compared with 10 years ago. 20 years ago, when you were in the office in Taipei, even if at that time between mainland China and Taiwan, we used to have the problem of Chen Shui-bian. But don't you think at that time, China and Beijing and Washington were on more or less on the same line in controlling Chen Shui-bian's efforts to make Taiwan to be independent? But now it says things have totally changed. Not to mention Lai Ching-te and Xiao Meiqing, even in terms of Tsai Ing-wen. Tsai Ing-wen has been more or less on the same line in a moderate way with Chen Shui-bian. But since the overall framework, strategic framework or geopolitical framework between China and the United States has changed. Now things are getting so complex. The United States is truly not necessarily on the same line with China in containing or controlling Tsai Ing-wen. Don't you think so?
Well, I think circumstances are different. The consistency that I would look for in American policy would be, on the one hand, continuing to support deterrence of the use of force to change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, and also continuing the diplomatic discipline that helps to preserve the status quo. I think Tsai Ing-wen has proved herself to be very different from Chen Shui-bian, and we have to see with Lai Ching-te if he's elected or whoever else might be elected in Taiwan. But I think people have learned the lesson that provocation is not beneficial to Taiwan's interests, but yielding to pressure is also not in Taiwan's interest, and they will strike a balance between the two.
Okay, now last but not least, I have two more last questions coming from the audience. One is in terms for both panelists, what is your evaluation on China's intention in the Asia Pacific? Does Chinese leadership really seek to challenge the US-led order in the Asia Pacific, or even replace the US as the hegemony in the Indo-Pacific or even the world? Maybe that's a question for Jianqun first.
Okay, this is a good question. I think the initiatives proposed by Chinese government, by our president, just to show the intention and the capability to have a more and more stable situation in this region, number one. Number two, as we all discussed, China would like to share our achievements. It's not a propaganda, it's actually a real intention. That means if we have peaceful and stable environment next to China, that might be a good condition for the domestic development. We are facing some challenges at home. For example, the slowdown of our economy and also the anti-corruption movement, we're still on the way. So I think China would like to maintain a good environmental condition, situation in this region. And of course, we continue to put the relations between China and the United States #1 job, and we can, get some benefit. And of course, that not only for the Chinese people, but also for the Americans to maintain such a healthy relationship.
Okay, Mr. Powell, what's your take? Let me give you a more background. Michael Pillsbury, he wrote a book a few years ago, 100 Years Marathon, and the strategies of China to replace the United States. And he mentioned starting from many, many years ago, I don't know in which year, in the last century, China has had the ambition to replace the United States as #1. So it's the book has been, I was told the book has been quite influential in the United States, particularly for the elite people. But when he gave me the book, so I truly didn't believe, how could China have the ambition to replace the United States in the last century, starting from 70, 80, and 90 years ago? But again, so now let's focus on the present and respect with historical background. So what's your feeling, or what's your evaluation?
It's no secret that China has been unhappy with the post-war order in the Asia-Pacific region, and therefore has been critical of the U.S. alliances with the Republic of Korea, with Japan, with the Philippines. That's nothing new. China has been seeking to dilute the American influence in the region and replace it with some new organizations and new alternatives, whether they're in the trade world or through the Belt and Road Initiative, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and other things. But at the same time, China does not want to have a confrontation with the US as it does so. It wants to achieve its objectives peacefully and to the extent possible, quietly. And that's where we try to find the line between cooperation and coexistence and undermining each other's relative status and leading to confrontation. And we're walking along that line now, and we will be walking that line, I think, for some years to come.
Okay, now we have the last question. In terms of US-China high-level military communication, which has just been re-established on the summit. So the question is, since the Chinese side is still missing the defense secretary so far, how the bilateral military engagement between two countries will be moving forward in the future?
Yeah, I think this is a very important arrangement for the two countries to resume mil-to-mil exchanges at this time after the summit in San Francisco. And we still waiting for the new Minister of Defense, Minister of Defense in China. I'm sure that maybe the new minister will be there soon. But I think we can continue at another level, regional command to regional command, exchanges. So I think military to military exchanges should be put on the high agenda for the exchanges between the two countries, because at this time the two militaries have more and more face-to-face engagement in air and at sea. So I think we should control any conflict between the direct conflict between the two militaries. That might be a disaster for such a direct confrontation or even a conflict. I don't think China and the United States can afford such a price to have such a direct conflict.
So the last question will be on my side, from my side. If we try to look at what's going on in 1 decade, let's say by 2033, I mean, time flies, right? Time flies. How peaceful everything was 10 years ago, and not to mention 20 years ago. If we try to look at what's moving on 10 years later, so what will be your feeling? Optimistic, pessimistic, or less optimistic, or less pessimistic? I mean, in terms of US-China overall complex, Mr. Park.
Well, if you look at the structural competition between the US and China, it's hard to be optimistic. But when you look at the potential for change inside China, I think the China that we see today may be very different 10 years from now, and that might be a source of optimism.
Okay, Jianqun.
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic about the future of the relation between the two countries. Even we still have some, differences. This is actually a normal way for two major powers to have a new balance of power. Maybe during the process of rebalancing power, there should be ups and downs. But I think the leaders, from the two countries, have such a wisdom to maintain the peace and the stability between the two sides, and to have the dispute management right now. So I think I'm quite optimistic about the future of the relations between the two countries.
Okay, thank you so much. Time is up, time flies, but we still have too many things on the table to talk about, which I hope is really, we can continue this talk from time to time, definitely not in 2.5 years. There's maybe 2.5 months, maybe in 3 months, we can try to talk again and try to stimulate more wisdom and thoughts. But one thing I do think, which is very different to the complex between the United States and the former Soviet Union, is we can talk, even with webinar, which wasn't the case before so many decades ago, right? Due to this, which we can still raise a hope. So let me ask Sheldon to run up.
Yeah, thank you for the whole great and engaging and really fascinating discussion. I learned a lot. I also taking a lot of notes. And earnest thanks to you all and for all the colleagues, friends, scholars, reporters, and students who joined us today. And I want to give a round of applause for our two excellent panelists, Mr. Paul and Dr. Teng, and also our moderator, Dr. Xiu. So your active participation in this crucial conversation holds immense value, and we collectively navigate this pivotal moments in the global affairs. So I think we're gonna close up for our U.S.-China strategic dialogue series. I think it is the last session for our dialogue series. So if you have any questions, concerns, or shared interest in collaboration among the research institutions or employment, I encourage you to explore our CGHK website. And just one thing I want to announce that the CGHK is gonna publish a new forecast for 2024. So that will be on our website, and we will gonna publish by the end of the December this year. So keep your eye on that. And don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email will be send it to the group chat, and your input and engagement is really instrumental to us. And then keep your eye on our other events or panel, either via Zoom or in person in the future. So thanks again, and have a good night for the people who stay in the US, and have a rest of your day for those in China.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Jianqun.
Bye.
Okay, see you soon. Okay,
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.